She didn't mean to whisper it, but the words escaped before she could stop them, soft, raw, and trembling with a hunger she hadn't felt in years. Don't stop. Lee Sang-hoon's hand paused against her jaw, his thumb tilting her face toward his with a gentleness that made her chest ache. He didn't rush, he waited, knowing she needed permission to want this. Beverly's breath hitched as the room grew suffocatingly close, the air thick with his presence. She had spent 3 years mourning a ghost, never realizing the man in front of her was the one who created him. Beverly's breath came in shallow gasps as rain hammered the alley pavement, each step forward a betrayal of the life she'd buried 3 years ago today. The wedding ring indent on her finger throbbed like a phantom limb. Daniel was supposed to grow old with her, not rot in a grave-marked accident. She turned the corner where neon signs bled crimson into puddles, and that's when she heard the wet thud of a body hitting brick. 3 men lay crumpled like discarded puppets. Blood pooled beneath them, mixing with rainwater, spiraling down the drain in pink ribbons that looked almost beautiful. A 4th man stood over them, his suit unmarred except for a single splash of red across his collar, deliberate, surgical, like he'd painted it there himself. The star-shaped tattoo on his neck caught the streetlight, 5 sharp points that looked burned into his skin. Lee Sang-hoon turned. His eyes locked onto Beverly's. She should have screamed. Should have run. Instead, her pulse detonated in her ears, a war drum she'd forgotten existed. Her fingernails bit into her palms hard enough to draw blood, and the sting felt like waking up after 3 years of sleepwalking through a life that had stopped mattering. This was what being alive felt like, terror and electricity and the razor edge between breathing and drowning. Sang-hoon's head tilted, studying her the way a collector examines a rare coin. He didn't raise his weapon. Didn't move toward her. He simply watched, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or hunger. Beverly's knees locked. The detective's voice echoed in her skull. Your husband's accident was quick, Mrs. Kim. He didn't suffer. But accidents didn't leave 3 bodies arranged like art. Accidents didn't have a man standing over them who looked bored. Daniel's death would have looked exactly like this. Sang-hoon holstered his gun with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. He stepped over the corpses, each footfall deliberate, closing the distance between them. Beverly's throat constricted. He passed close enough that she smelled gunpowder and something expensive, cologne that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Close enough to kill her with his bare hands. He kept walking. Beverly's spine hit the alley wall, her legs finally giving out. She slid down the brick, rainwater soaking through her dress, her heart not just beating anymore. It was screaming, clawing, demanding more of whatever this was. For the first time since the funeral, she felt the searing heat of being truly, terrifyingly alive. At the alley exit, something glinted in a puddle. Beverly's hand trembled as she reached for it, a silver cufflink, still warm. Blood hadn't dried on the engraved initials yet. DK. Daniel Kim. Beverly's laptop screen burned her eyes at 3 a.m., the cufflink lying beside the keyboard like evidence at a crime scene. 5-point star tattoo. Korean Syndicate. The search results led her down a digital rabbit hole that ended with a name that made her mouth go dry. Lee Sang-hoon, the Devil of Seoul. Every forum post, every redacted police report, every whispered rumor pointed to one place. The Lotus, a lounge where men who owned the night came to collect their debts. She stood outside the entrance 2 nights later, the cufflink burning in her clutch. The doorman's eyes swept over her like a scanner, lingering on the hollow of her throat where Daniel's necklace used to rest. He stepped aside without a word, and Beverly realized she'd already been expected. Sang-hoon sat in the back corner, a throne of shadows and leather. His suit probably cost more than Daniel's funeral. Beverly's heels clicked against marble as she crossed the room, and every conversation died like candles snuffed out. She reached his table, her pulse hammering against her ribs so hard she thought he could hear it. You kept it. Sang-hoon's eyes dropped to her clutch, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Beverly slammed the cufflink onto the table. Whose initials are these? Someone who needed to disappear. His voice was silk wrapped around a blade, smooth enough to cut without her noticing until she bled. The real question is why you're here instead of the police, Beverly. Her name in his mouth felt like a violation and a claim all at once. You know who I am. I know everything about you. Sang-hoon leaned back, studying her the way a wolf studies wounded prey. What you don't know is who you were married to. The words landed like a fist to her sternum. Beverly's fingernails carved crescents into her palms, the sting keeping her upright. I know my husband. Your husband was a ghost wearing a wedding ring. Sang-hoon raised one finger, and a server materialized with 2 glasses of amber liquid that smelled like money and danger. He slid one toward Beverly, then did something that made the entire room hold its breath. He reached across the table and wrapped his fingers around hers. His touch was warm, deliberate, a brand that marked ownership. Tell me, Beverly. Sang-hoon's thumb traced the pale band on her ring finger where gold used to live, his touch both gentle and possessive. How long are you going to mourn a man who was already planning to bury you? Every head in the lounge turned away, suddenly fascinated with their drinks. But Sang-hoon's gaze never wavered, pinning her like a butterfly to cork, and Beverly realized with dawning horror that she didn't want him to let go. He leaned forward, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he whispered 2 words that detonated her world. Daniel Kim. Sang-hoon appeared outside Beverly's apartment the next morning like a storm that had been gathering for years. No warning. No permission. Just his presence, solid and inescapable as gravity pulling her towards something she couldn't name. You can't be here. Beverly's voice fractured down the middle, betraying the lie. I'm everywhere you are now. Sang-hoon's hand found the small of her back, and the touch sent heat spiraling through her spine, the first warmth she'd felt since Daniel's casket closed. You just didn't know to look. 6 men materialized from shadows Beverly had walked past every day for 3 years. They bowed in perfect unison as Sang-hoon moved her toward the street, a choreographed display of power that made her skin prickle with something between terror and exhilaration. One subordinate opened a car door. Another scanned rooftops with eyes that had catalogued too many deaths. Her building had never been a fortress. Now it looked like a kingdom, and she was the asset being protected, or imprisoned. What is this? Beverly tried to pull away, but Sang-hoon's grip tightened just enough to remind her who held the power. Insurance. He stopped at her door, turning her to face him, his thumb tilting her chin up with the same gentleness he'd used to kill 3 men. You know too much, Beverly. That makes you valuable. His fingers traced her jawline like he was memorizing the architecture of her surrender. Too beautiful to stay a ghost. He pressed something cold into her palm, a diamond necklace that caught the hallway light like shattered stars, the kind of gift that came with invisible chains attached. The kind Daniel never gave her because he was too busy laundering blood money. Beverly's throat constricted. This man had murdered for a living, yet his touch made her feel more seen than 10 years of marriage ever had. The guilt tasted like copper on her tongue. I don't want this, she whispered, fingers closing around the diamonds. Sang-hoon's smile was a knife wrapped in velvet. Liar. He left her trembling against the door frame, the world tilting like she'd stepped too close to a cliff's edge and forgotten how to step back. The black sedan appeared an hour later, idling, waiting, following her to the bank, the store, everywhere. A shadow with an engine. The package waited on her doorstep at dusk, wrapped in black paper with no return address, no name, just her apartment number written in handwriting she'd never seen before. The woman standing in Beverly's doorway wore power like a second skin, Chanel suit sharp enough to draw blood, pearl earrings that probably cost more than Beverly's car, and a smile that promised violence wrapped in silk. I'm Minute G. Sang-hoon's sister. She walked past Beverly without invitation, heels clicking against hardwood like a countdown timer. We need to discuss my brother's new obsession. Beverly's spine locked rigid. I didn't ask for any of this. No one ever does. Minute G circled the living room, examining framed photos like a detective cataloging evidence at a crime scene, her fingers trailing over the wedding picture Beverly still hadn't taken down. Men like Sang-hoon don't have hearts, Beverly. They have territories. And congratulations, you just became his. The air thickened until Beverly's lungs burned. Her fingers found the couch edge, gripping until her knuckles bleached white as bone. Minute G stopped at the mantel, lifting the wedding photo, Beverly and Daniel, frozen in a lie that had lasted 3 years past its expiration. Your husband was a skilled liar. She said it casually, like discussing weather patterns. Did you know that? Daniel was a financial consultant. Daniel laundered 30 million for the Yakuza. Minute G set the frame down face first, a small death. He used your name, your credit, your signature on documents that could have gotten you executed. Her eyes held the same abyss as her brother's. Sang-hoon didn't kill your husband, Beverly. He saved you from being collateral damage. The room spun. Beverly tasted copper, her teeth cutting into her cheek hard enough to draw blood. 3 years she'd mourned a ghost who'd been planning to sell her like livestock. "Get out now," Minute G said, moving toward the door with predatory grace. "Or you won't get out at all." The apartment felt contaminated after she left. Beverly's hands shook as she tore through Daniel's desk, the shrine she'd preserved like a museum to their love. The bottom drawer stuck. She pried harder, wood splintering under her desperation, revealing a false bottom. Inside, a burner phone, black and cold as a threat. One message glowed on the cracked screen, sent 3 years ago, the night Daniel died. "It's done. She doesn't know anything." The man's hand clamped over Beverly's mouth in the parking garage, his grip iron and desperate, dragging her between concrete pillars where security cameras couldn't see. She tried to scream, but he shoved a manila folder against her chest hard enough to bruise. "Don't fight. I'm saving your life." His eyes darted toward the exit, pupils dilated with the kind of fear that comes from knowing death has a name. "Read it. Then decide if the devil deserves your loyalty." Beverly's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. The first page showed Sang-hoon's signature, elegant, deliberate, beautiful, beside 3 words that detonated her world: eliminate Daniel Kim. The execution order. Dated 3 years ago. Signed in ink that looked black as a funeral suit. Her vision blurred at the edges. The diamond necklace around her throat suddenly felt like a noose tightening with every breath. "He's been watching you since the day your husband died." The rival flipped through surveillance photos, Beverly at the funeral in her black dress, at the grocery store buying meals for one, walking alone on their anniversary while rain soaked through to her skin. Every moment of her grief, catalogued like a predator tracking wounded prey. "You were never free, Beverly. You were always his project." The folder slipped from her fingers, evidence scattering across oil-stained concrete. Her knees threatened to buckle, but rage locked them straight as iron rods. 3 years she'd been a ghost. 3 years Sang-hoon had been playing architect with her devastation. "Why show me this?" "Because Sang-hoon killed my brother too." The rival pressed something cold into her palm, a switchblade, small enough to hide in a purse, sharp enough to end a life. "He'll be at the Lotus tonight. Alone. You get one chance to make the devil bleed." Beverly's fingers closed around the knife. The ink on those papers felt like blood seeping into her pores, staining everything she'd thought was real. "I'll be there," Beverly whispered, her voice flat as a tombstone. The rival vanished into shadows. Beverly stood alone, a weapon in her purse and murder singing through her veins like a lullaby. Sang-hoon sat in the corner booth of the cafe, coffee untouched, like he'd been waiting for Beverly since the beginning of time. The knife in her purse burned against a trembling palm, slick with sweat that smelled like fear and fury mixed into something combustible. "You signed the order." Beverly slid the folder across the table, her voice a wire pulled so tight it hummed. "Daniel Kim. 3 years ago. Your signature." Sang-hoon opened the folder with the casual grace of a man examining a restaurant menu. He studied his own handwriting, that elegant, damning script, then closed it without a flicker of remorse crossing his face. "Yes." The single word hit like a bullet to the sternum. Beverly's hand dove into her purse, fingers wrapping around the switchblade's handle, her thumb finding the release mechanism. The click echoed through the quiet cafe like a death knell. She brought the knife up, arm shaking so violently the blade caught afternoon light in fractured patterns. 3 years of grief sharpened into this single point, this one chance to balance scales that had been tipped since the day she became a widow. Sang-hoon didn't move. Didn't call for his men stationed outside. Didn't even lean back in his seat. He simply watched her with those obsidian eyes, waiting for something she couldn't name. "I didn't know who you were then." His voice dropped to something almost gentle, almost human. Just another name on a contract. Another thread that needed cutting before the whole tapestry unraveled. Beverly's pulse hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. The blade hovered between them, 6 inches from his throat, close enough to see his heartbeat in the hollow of his neck, steady, unafraid, impossibly calm. "If you're going to kill me, Beverly," Sang-hoon leaned forward, letting the knife's tip press against his sternum, right where his heart should be. "Do it right. Through the ribs, angled up. Quick. Clean. The way I taught you in the warehouse." He was instructing her how to murder him, his voice carrying the same patience he'd used when teaching her to hold a gun. Beverly's vision blurred. Sweat stung her eyes. The cafe held its breath. "Why?" The word cracked down the middle, splintering into 1,000 pieces of grief. Why did you kill him? Sang-hoon's hand covered hers on the knife, warm and deliberate. Because your husband was going to kill you first. Sang-hoon pulled a phone from his jacket, not his usual sleek device, but something older, cracked, with a screen that had seen too many secrets. Daniel's phone. Beverly's breath caught like a fishhook lodged in her throat. Your husband laundered $30 million for the Yakuza through shell companies built on your identity. Sang-hoon swiped through messages, each one a nail hammered into the coffin she'd already mourned. Your name. Your credit. Your signature forged on documents that made you an accessory to murder. Beverly's grip on the knife loosened. That's impossible. He was meticulous. Sang-hoon turned the screen toward her. Email chains, bank transfers, her name stamped on contracts she'd never seen, never signed, never knew existed. When the Yakuza discovered he was skimming $2 million off the top, they gave him a choice: deliver you as collateral, or die. The cafe walls pressed inward. Beverly's wedding ring, the one she'd finally removed last month after 3 years of wearing it like a badge of devotion, had left a ghost on her finger that suddenly felt like a brand marking livestock. Daniel chose himself. Sang-hoon pulled up a final message, and the words glowed like a death sentence. She's home alone. 10 p.m. Come get her. I'll leave the door unlocked. Beverly's knees buckled. She collapsed into the booth seat, the knife clattering onto the table between them. 3 years she'd kept his toothbrush in the bathroom. 3 years she'd slept on one side of the bed, preserving space for a ghost who'd been planning to feed her to wolves. You were never his wife, Beverly. Sang-hoon's voice cut through the ringing in her ears like a scalpel through infected flesh. You were his insurance policy. His ticket to survival. The grief that had lived in Beverly's chest like a stone for 3 years cracked open, but what poured out wasn't tears, it was something cold and sharp and hungry. The man she'd mourned for 1,000 nights was a stranger wearing her husband's face. The man she'd feared had saved her life. The explosion came without warning, a percussion blast that blew out the cafe windows in a shower of crystallized violence, glass shredding the air like 1,000 knives, and Beverly's world erupted into fire and smoke and screaming. Sang-hoon's body slammed into Beverly's before her brain registered the explosion, driving her beneath the table as bullets chewed through what remained of the cafe's walls. His weight crushed the air from her lungs, his hand cradling the back of her head like she was something fragile he couldn't afford to break. Stay down. His voice cracked on the second word, not fear, but pain that tasted like copper in the smoke-filled air. Blood dripped onto Beverly's cheek. Warm. Dark. Sang-hoon's shoulder bloomed crimson where a bullet had carved a trench through muscle, the fabric of his expensive suit shredding around the wound like torn skin. 3 men in tactical gear stormed through the shattered entrance, weapons raised, faces masked. The rivals' men. They'd used Beverly as bait, and she'd walked them straight to their target like a lamb leading wolves to the shepherd. Sang-hoon fired twice from his position over her, dropping one assassin before his gun clicked empty. He threw it aside, reaching for the knife Beverly had dropped, but her hand closed around it first. The second assassin rounded the overturned table. Beverly didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Didn't remember 3 years of being a ghost who couldn't even choose what to eat for dinner. She drove the blade up under his ribs the way Sang-hoon had taught her 60 seconds ago, angled toward the heart, and felt the terrible resistance of steel puncturing flesh and the hot spray of blood that followed. The man's eyes went wide. Then empty. Then he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Move. Sang-hoon hauled Beverly up by her arm, shoving her toward the back exit as gunfire tracked their steps, splintering wood and tile and everything that used to be her normal life. They burst into the alley where rain mixed with blood and gunpowder, and ran. Beverly's heels were gone, torn off somewhere between the cafe and the first corner. Her dress hung in tatters. Her hands shook so violently she could barely grip Sang-hoon's jacket as he pulled her through a maze of back alleys that all looked identical, brick and graffiti and dumpsters that smelled like decay. But the adrenaline screaming through her veins felt like resurrection. For 3 years she'd been sleepwalking through a life that didn't matter. Now, covered in someone else's blood with her heart trying to punch through her ribs, Beverly felt the searing electricity of being truly, violently alive. They reached a steel door buried in shadow. Sang-hoon punched in a code with blood-slicked fingers, each number leaving a crimson smear. The lock disengaged with a sound like a vault ceiling. Inside, concrete walls thick as bunkers, security monitors flickering with a dozen camera feeds, weapons mounted like art in glass cases that caught the emergency lighting. The door sealed behind them with the finality of a coffin closing. Sang-hoon turned, His eyes black fire despite the blood soaking through his shoulder, and pressed Beverly against the wall. His blooded hand cupped her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "No turning back now," he whispered against her temple. "You're mine, Beverly. And I'm never letting you go." The warehouse stank of rust and rain, water pouring through gaps in the corrugated roof like the sky was hemorrhaging. Min-jun stood in the center surrounded by a dozen armed men, his smile all teeth and malice, the kind of grin that promised slow deaths. The devil brought his pet widow. Min-jun's voice echoed off metal beams like a death knell. "How touching that you'll die together." Beverly stepped forward before Sang-hoon could stop her, her bare feet splashing through puddles that reflected emergency lights like blood in water. The gun she'd taken from the safe house felt heavy and right in her grip, an extension of the rage that had replaced 3 years of grief. "I'm not his pet." Beverly's voice cut through the rain, sharp as the blade she'd used to kill a man 2 hours ago. "I'm the woman who knows you orchestrated everything. The dossier, the photos, the cafe bombing. You wanted Sang-hoon distracted while you moved on his territory." Min-jun's smile fractured at the edges. Just a hairline crack, but enough to betray the truth. "You gave me that folder because you thought a grieving widow would be easy to weaponize." Beverly circled him the way she'd seen Sang-hoon move, like a predator assessing prey, not a victim begging for mercy. "You thought I'd kill him for you. Save you the risk." She stopped, raising the gun with hands that no longer trembled. "You thought wrong." Sang-hoon's eyes tracked her movement, something like pride flickering in their obsidian depths. His men fanned out behind him in a choreographed display of lethal intent, but he raised one hand, holding them back. This was Beverly's moment to prove she'd stopped being a ghost. "You can't prove anything," Min-jun spat, but his hand drifted toward his holster in a movement that screamed desperation. "I don't need proof." Beverly pulled the burner phone from her pocket, Daniel's phone, the one Sang-hoon had shown her, now her insurance policy. "I need leverage. Your messages to my husband are on here. Every deal you brokered. Every account you drained using his shell companies. Every lie you built." She threw the phone at his feet, where it skidded through rainwater. "The police get this recording, and your entire operation burns." The warehouse went silent except for rain hammering metal like a countdown. Min-jun's men shifted, uncertain, their loyalty suddenly a commodity they could no longer afford to spend on a leader who'd been outmaneuvered by a widow in a torn dress. "Shoot her," Min-jun barked, but his voice cracked like thin ice, and no one moved. Sang-hoon stepped beside Beverly, his presence a wall of contained violence that made the air vibrate. "She's untouchable now." He let the word settle like sediment in dark water. "My word. My protection. My territory." His hand found Beverly's waist, pulling her against him in a claim that every man in that warehouse understood. "Anyone who touches her answers to me. And I don't believe in quick deaths." The message landed like an execution order. Beverly wasn't just alive. She'd been crowned. Min-jun's face twisted into something feral. He reached for his weapon, but Beverly fired first. The shot went wide, intentionally, blowing out the window behind him in an explosion of glass that sent his men scattering like roaches fleeing light. "Next one goes through your skull," Beverly said, and every man in that warehouse believed her. Min-jun ran. His men followed. And Beverly stood in the center of the warehouse with a smoking gun and the Devil of Soul's arm around her waist, finally belonging somewhere that wasn't a graveyard. Rain continued as Sang-hoon's men secured the perimeter. Beverly's hands finally started shaking, the adrenaline draining out through her fingertips like water through a sieve. Sang-hoon caught her wrist, steadying her, and pulled her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her spine. "You're not a ghost anymore," he murmured against her temple, his breath warm despite the cold rain. "No," Beverly whispered back, her voice raw as an open wound. "I'm yours." They returned to the penthouse as dawn broke over the city in shades of blood and gold. Beverly stood at the window watching light chase away shadows, feeling the weight of the diamond necklace around her throat, no longer a noose, but a crown that marked her transformation from widow to queen. Sang-hoon approached from behind, his reflection ghosting over hers in the glass. His hands found her waist, pulling her back against his chest with a possessiveness that should have terrified her but instead felt like finally coming home. She didn't mean to whisper it, but the words escaped before she could stop them, soft, raw, and trembling with a hunger she hadn't felt in years. "Don't stop." Sang-hoon's hand paused against her jaw, his thumb tilting her face toward his with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Then, In a move that shocked them both, he dropped to one knee before her, taking her blood-stained hand in his. "Beverly," he said, his voice stripped of every defense, every mask, every lie. "For better or for worse, you're mine, and I'm yours. Forever."